everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to Stock Market Today. Ali Corman, Ed Carson here with a breakdown of the action today, as well as what happened all week long in the market, Ed. So finishing the week on a high note here, although snapping a win streak when it comes to the 5 weekly gains for the NASDAQ. That ends this week, but not too much damage.
Not too much damage. You could say it was probably healthy to have this tiny little drop. And we do have some stocks that were flashing buy signals today: Shopify, ASML, and Chinese EV maker Xpeng.
Okay, well, we'll check in on those. First, look at the major indexes. Here is the NASDAQ composite on Think or Swim. So Friday's gain coming in at 1% for the NASDAQ. The S&P 500 up 0.7%, the Dow up 0.5%, and the Russell 2000 up about 0.1%. So coming down midweek, but not even to the 21-day line for the NASDAQ here. And again, getting a bounce on Friday. So good to see us cooling off here just a little bit after week of a big run up.
Yeah, we run up many times, and we were getting above 6% above the 50-day line early in the week. That's usually an area where you start getting worried about a pullback. Not saying it's going to be a pullback or even that'll be that big. Like we had a pullback and it ultimately wasn't that bad. I mean, Wednesday didn't look so good. There was some heavy losses. I mean, Tesla, some high flying IPOs, and the NASDAQ came down a bit. But as you said, it was not even to its 21-day line. And here we come up, and really it's pretty resilient. We had inflation data. Some of these big leading names were falling. And yet here we go, closed with pretty much a fractional loss. I mean, that's very resilient given the news. You could have easily seen a much larger drop if somebody had told you those news elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And taking a look at a weekly chart also to put things in perspective here. So a red bar here, but not a whole lot of bleeding after a very strong ascent. Now, underneath the surface, Ed, do you feel like the mild decline this week, is that disguising a lot of weakness underneath, or does it still feel pretty healthy underneath the surface too?
It still seems fairly healthy. I mean, look, there's individual names that sold off, and there's going to be names, and some of them needed to sell off. Some of them are breaking down. Okay, some of them broke down, but there's still a lot of quality names out there. I mean, really, probably could have used some more days or more weeks moving sideways, but we saw some stocks set up a little bit, pause for a little while, and there's a lot of bullish action out there.
Okay, well, let's now flip on over to the S&P 500 on MarketSmith. So a little pause here as well. And as you mentioned, whenever we do get a pause after a big rally, that helps new buy points formulate.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at a couple of them where you're going to, we basically pulled back for a week. Well, we're going to see some handles as a result of that. And, the S&P was sort of getting close to being extended. And again, it's just nice to see that pause. There's still a lot of breadth. The fact that the S&P is doing so well, when you think about it, there's some energy names, there's, industrials, there's obviously chips and software, whole slew of areas are still doing very well. Different sectors have different days that do well. But, you look at it, very resilient. This is as Joe Fahmy, who was on the IBD Live today, just brought up the fact that the end of the year tends to be a pretty strong time for the market, and it's looking pretty good right now.
So the strength that we saw on Friday, do you think that bodes well for more strength early next week? Or do you think that we could still see the market come in, given that we're still at relatively elevated levels? Again, the S&P not even coming down to its 21-day line, still above the 10-day.
Yeah, I mean, look, after the action, you just sort of look at it Thursday and then Friday, you might think that the trend would be, you basically think, well, whatever just happened will likely continue. I mean, yeah, we could pull back down. We barely fell at all. If we wanted to come back down or just rise for a couple more days and then roll over again, anything could happen. Right now, it's looking pretty positive. I don't think there's a need to go massively expand, and we can talk about that later. But if you bought back in mid-October, late October, there wasn't a whole lot of reason to do a whole lot, and things are still looking pretty good going forward.
Okay, and a quick look on blue chips and small caps. So the Dow here quick check in there, back above that 36,000 level. Taking a look at the Russell 2000, which is tracked by the IWM ETF, which we pointed out a breakout last week for small caps, and still holding up and holding most of those gains from the prior week.
Yeah, so that's like holding that breakout, holding that 10-day line. When the major indexes basically fall to the 10-day line, it's usually not too big of a deal.
And also growth stocks. So checking in on the FFTY ETF, which tracks the IBD 50. Pretty tough midweek session, down about 4.3% on Wednesday, but bouncing relatively strongly on Thursday and continuing higher on Friday, although it did not outpace the NASDAQ Composite's 1% gain Friday.
Yeah, there were some names, and I know that the IBD 50 has some names, and some of them were big winners, but there are also some big losers. Tesla and Upstart, at least Upstart was in there. So might have exaggerated some of the moves down and up, but the growth trajectory is still looking pretty good.
Okay, and now let's take a look at some growth names underneath the surface. So we have Shopify. Look at this by the end of the day. It's been a couple hours since I checked in on this one, Ed. We looked at it on IBD Live this morning when it was up about 5-6% or so, but by the end of the day, finishing with a gain of 12%. So really making a comeback in a big way after falling off of our radar in the August, September, October period. But this last earnings report, even though if you're just looking at those percentages, those don't really scream strength, but the chart is saying otherwise.
That was a real surprise. And believe me, it was a miss. I mean, it was not a good looking report, and it was down pretty sharply to start, in the pre-market, and it did dip to begin. But boy, look at that volume. Look at that volume in that first day on earnings, just massive trade. So big institutions came into support. That just wasn't you and me buying 3 shares and saying, we like Shopify. This was amazing. And so that, you get nice trend line there. And either whether it's that day or a couple of days later, that was an early entry with that, and then, yeah, you could have gone right over there or either a downsloping trend line or just there, sort of a quasi handle. Could have bought it throughout today. And even now, it's feeling a little lofty at these levels because you could certainly imagine a pullback, say to 1600, and that would not be a surprise, but it is in buy range even from that. The volume, again, was tremendous today. The volume, I don't know if that's counted everything, but you're seeing a lot of accumulation all of a sudden the last few weeks in addition to that. So it is surprising the earnings are weakening, but you look at Shopify, you look at Etsy doing the same kind of thing, and it's like, investors don't care. They're betting on these names. I don't know if Etsy's numbers were, but I think that guidance wasn't great. I think it may have beaten views, but declining profit doesn't matter. That stock is taking off. And, you just have to this is what the market is saying. And it's liking these e-commerce names.
Yeah, because for a while there, it seemed like there was a rotation in leadership in enterprise software from Shopify and DocuSign to maybe some of the smaller or lesser known names. And now Shopify, once again, looking like it's flexing its leadership muscles here, but can it keep it up after this strong breakout? We'll have to keep tabs on it next week. And next on our list, a name in the chip sector that is not NVIDIA or AMD, but one that we also talk about relatively frequently, and that is ASML, definitely a leader in the chip equipment group, has finally taken the time to build a base after a very big run starting about a year ago, Ed, and forming another buying opportunity here.
Yeah, and while it's not going to show up on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, it has a handle now. It's not that'll pop up hopefully on markets within a couple hours. Usually takes a couple hours after the close, but I believe or is it one more day? I get confused, but it's right around there. It's basically formed a handle. I think if it gets above that level, the investors could treat that as sort of a handle. You could just do a downslope trending line from the top, getting to that level. So even that was sort of almost flashing an entry during the day. There was some heavy volume selling on the left-hand side, not as much on the right-hand side. That's about the only real negative thing you can say. I mean, the RS line is already above the handle high, and the RS line had gone on a 3-year run, so you can't get this is not sideways action from this name. So a really strong performer that is trying to show, to set up again.
Yeah, and just putting it in the context of what we're seeing broadly in the chip sector, just some explosive moves by a lot of names. This isn't just NVIDIA, this isn't just AMD, but we're seeing a lot of names in this group acting very strong right now. So you have that going for you with ASML, just that group strength.
Yeah, it's nice to see. It's always good to have the friends in there. And yeah, while ASML is technically lagging right now, it was surging when the SMH was going sideways. So definitely still a leader. Shopify has friends, and it's always good to have stocks that have friends that are doing well.
Yes. And now let's talk about an EV stock, because whether it's the US automakers, Tesla, some of those up and coming names as well, or the China EV plays, they are really back in the spotlight. This theme, electric vehicles, is really on the radar of a lot of investors right now. So here we have Xpeng, XPEV, with a gain of 2% on Friday. Some nice volume behind the move as well, with a gain of about 4.7% for the week, with a nice upside reversal after coming down to the 21-day.
Yeah, so while on Friday it basically hit an 8-month high or 9-month high, backed off, but it did stay above the 48.08 high. I think that's the best close in a long, long time. So wasn't the greatest intraday action, though it did firm up a little bit at the end, but the weekly action very strong. They announced today that they're going to unveil a new SUV, electric SUV, at an auto show next week. There's going to be the LA Auto Show. This one's in China, but this one is going to be interesting. Another area that everybody loves the SUVs and crossovers, and they're doing that in EVs as well. And it's also with GM and Toyota. Basically, GM said positive things about chips, and Toyota said positive things about chips. That are actually all their factories are back online, and Xpeng and all these other EV makers, they were struggling with chips as well. So as those come back online, I know that Xpeng has been expanding its production capacity. They could really see. I mean, you can look at the revenue growth is tremendous, but that should stay very strong in the year ahead as as the chips come back online. And there's certainly a lot of demand in China, and they're expanding to Norway. So a lot of good prospects for this one. Of course, there's a lot of good prospects for a lot of them. You can't buy them all, so you have to pick and choose. This is definitely worth considering.
You mean buying 10 EV stocks isn't a diversified portfolio there?
Yeah, probably not. Probably don't want to have Xpeng, Tesla, GM, Lucid, and and all that, and put all your portfolio in that. That's a little bit more than one spare tire for that.
Yeah, I don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So with Xpeng in particular, with this auto show next week, and then with EV stocks more broadly, it seems like we potentially could see more catalysts for this group next week.
If we do, and I will say that, if the Rivian IPO has probably provided some momentum for it, I own some Lucid that has earnings on Monday, so that could be catalyst, good or bad. I mean, at some point there might be like, wait a second, these are all worth a lot of money. Can they all be worth this much? That's perfectly justified. And it's like, yes, they are. That's what the market says until the market says it isn't. So that's another reason not to be so concentrated, because they can all go up together and they can all come back down.
Very true. All right, Ed. Well, let's chat about the game plan for the week ahead. What should traders be doing this weekend to study up and prep for another week of trade next week?
Well, I mean, you always evaluate your portfolio. Maybe you cut some losses along the way, some stocks. Check them around. It's like maybe you're too concentrated, or maybe you just say like these are lagging, or there's probably not too many winners that are extended because we came back down a little bit. But you might consider adding to your exposure as long as you're not getting too concentrated, assuming the market conditions are strong. But it's just definitely one just to say steady, not over trade. It's not there's probably a lot of your portfolio is already there, and there's no reason to get out of it. And there's no reason to pile on if you're in good stocks.
And you mentioned Lucid coming out with earnings early next week. NVIDIA also comes to mind with its earnings report next week. Any other key earnings that we should be keeping an eye out for?
All Applied Materials, which is, a peer of ASML. And, we mentioned Xpeng, that's in 2 weeks, but it's definitely something down the road. So yeah, there's still a lot of good earnings and a lot of retail names, Macy's, Home Depot, there's definitely, and a lot of those retail names are doing well. So
They
earnings
are.
season never seems to end. So don't neglect that.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. We will, of course, be back with more on Monday morning on IBD Live. So please tune in. More details at investors.com/IBD Live. We'll see you there, and we'll see you back here Monday after the close as well. Have a great weekend, everyone.